privately message the host, Laken, just to write out your name just so we know who's here, and it can be fairly counted for the Duncan's gift card. The winner will be announced at the end of the chat. Thank you again for registering. I hope that we can speak soon, get more info going, or any future sessions we have. Hope this is helpful for you guys. And back to our super wise host who will give us all the download on IEPs.
All right. I'm going to mute you and turn off your video, Lisette.
Okay.
All right, let me get this shared. You know what? I might not be able to see my chat box while I'm in here. All right, guys, while I'm sharing, I might not be able to see the chat box. So again, I'll touch all the questions and comments at the end. So sorry about that, guys. I thought I could kind of scan through that while I'm sharing as a host. But okay, so let me go back. Oops. Real quick. Okay, so tonight's presentation is the ABCs of the IEP. And just to introduce myself, my name is Laken Wilson. I am the Senior Special Ed Advocate here at CPARC. Pretty much what we do is if there's any issues or concerns with kids in special ed, whether the family the family disagrees with the school, or they feel like services are not being provided enough, or sometimes just families need to better understand the process of everything that's going on, that's when we can get involved. And the parents would reach out to us and go ahead and consent that we can get involved. And mainly we will go ahead and attend meetings, and we try to find some kind of middle ground between the family and the school, and making sure that the kids get the needs that they, all their needs are addressed, and all the programming that would benefit them for their education, that they are receiving that. Just a little bit of background on me. I am a mother of two. I have a 3-year-old, and my little guy's about to turn 1 next month. So they keep me pretty busy outside the office. But I have background in behavioral work with kiddos as a therapeutic support staff. And then I worked several years in an autistic support classroom in a couple different settings. So I was a teacher's assistant, a personal care aide, and then I came on board with CPARC, and I've been here for about 2.5 years, and I really love this job. But we started these advocacy talk series, and it's just a better way to get out different information on a difference of topics. And just last month we did one on evaluation, so this month is on knowing the basics of the IEP, and it just breaks it down. And again, if any questions come up, I can't necessarily see them right now because my chat won't come up, but we will address all the questions at the end. And then if anyone feels like they need to go a little bit more in depth, maybe some relevance to their own child or a family friend, feel free to reach out here at the office as well. So to get started, this presentation is just going to go over all the sections of the IEP, break it down, kind of just let you know what should be in each section, what to look for. And one of the biggest issues that we come across in schools is they're so used to the language that sometimes they forget. Parents don't always know what the verbiage means. So hopefully this will break it down into a little bit simpler terms, and you guys will have a better understanding of the document and what to look for. So a couple things just starting. You can get a meeting, and everyone can have a meeting anytime with an IEP. There's always an annual meeting, and that will go every year. But at any point in time, if there's an issue or a concern, or you just want to do a check-in, you can request a meeting, and everyone will get a meeting. Sometimes You feel outnumbered. There's a bunch of school staff, and you have all those players, and sometimes I've been in meetings where I've sat in, there's 12, 15 people, and the parents are there by themselves, and they just, having an advocate makes them feel a little bit more secure in their decision making, because when you have that many people outnumbering you, you're not so sure what's actually good for your child, even though you feel deep down you know what to express, but then you get a little unconfident in your answering. So sometimes just having that additional support is needed. Again, bring your team. If you need an advocate, if you want to bring your spouse or your partner, you can bring a family friend. Any one of those, you can bring your team with you. And again, everyone's there at the table, and they all have a piece of the puzzle, and trying to figure out what program's best for the child. So again, it's just taking and considering everyone's piece of that. And then again, IEP goals and objectives met, that's always the goal here. And it's always a good day when you have the IEP fixed. All right, so breaking down the parts of the IEP, this is just listing what you're gonna see, and we'll go in depth over all these, but the bigger areas are gonna be your present levels, your goals, your SDIs. Those are typically the 3 big parts that you're gonna hear about, but we're gonna break down into every section. And again, I don't think I said this at the beginning, we will be sending out a PowerPoint following probably tomorrow morning. We will send this out so everyone has a copy of it then. All right, so the first section of the IEP is just going to go over demographics, and this is just your basic information: the student's name, the date of the IEPs, his age, their grade, what school they attend, the parents' information, all that basic general information that you would need to fill out pretty much on any form. With these, you want to check dates, especially with the IEP implementation date, because the IEP is good for 1 year. And as I had mentioned, you will have a yearly meeting or an annual meeting, and that has to be completed prior to that date. If it's past that year date, then it would be out of compliance. So it's always make sure you're mindful of the dates. So at the bottom then of this page, it's going to be listing of any revisions that have been made. So within that year IEP, you might have revised that, a kid might have mastered their goal and you need a new goal, or you realize the kid, needs a couple bit more accommodations to be a little successful in their education. So during that year, they will go ahead and date all the revisions down there and who was participating in that meeting, and then they will go ahead and address where you can find it in the IEP for the revisions. And again, this is where you would want to make sure that parents are agreeing to follow those revisions, and again, check the dates and make sure all those revisions are listed out appropriately. So again, this is just going into a little bit more of the demographic form procedure, and this is just anyone that's in attendance. So it would be, it's an array of different things for each individual child, but it's going to be the parent. Sometimes the student will attend. It really varies on their level and their age, and if they feel comfortable enough to attend their own meeting. The regular ed teacher that would be involved with your child. So, whether that's their homeroom teacher, if that's their all-day teacher, if it might be a specials teacher. And then there should be a special education teacher involved, and typically that will be the case manager as well. So that could be your learning support teacher, your autistic support teacher, any of those ones that would actually deliver the special education services. And then a local ed agency rep, and you will refer to this as an LEA in the school district. So I'm going to be throwing out a good bit of acronyms tonight, and that's typically what the school will address them by. And as a resource, I can send you guys a glossary that kind of better explains the acronyms. But for the local ed agency, Typically, this is going to be your special ed supervisor or director. It could be a principal. It's essentially anyone that can go ahead and make an agreement to the programming and verify that the school can fund that programming. So, for instance, if a child is looking at a new placement, an LEA needs to be involved because a special ed teacher cannot verify that that student could go ahead and change placements at that point. They need to have a administrative level, essentially in special ed or in the school district. And again, it could be an array of different people that are involved. If I'm involved, I would just write family support or advocate and then sign off that I attended. If a family friend or grandma comes, they would just sign off as well. So it's anyone that's at the table at the meeting. This is not agreeing to anything. It's just simply saying that you are in attendance. Again, at the bottom, this would be any input from members that are not in attendance. So for instance, if a child has math out in regular ed, but all his other courses are in learning support, this teacher could put some input in that was received by the other staff members, but they might not be attending the meeting. So that's where that would be covered. So transfer of rights at age of majority. In Pennsylvania, the age of majority is 21. A lot of states, the age of majority is 18. So this is when your rights as an adult kick in the school session. So, you know, most people think of adults as 18. They can make their own choices. In an educational stance, parents have the right to make all educational decisions until that child reaches 21. Like I said, a lot of states are 18. PA is one of the few. And then again, that will get a lot more into conversation when we hit transition age. So the next page is just simply agreeing or acknowledging that you had received the procedural safeguards. And the procedural safeguards will be a big packet that they give to you at every meeting. And this will just break down all of the rights that a special ed child has. And there's a couple resources in there as well for parents that they can call it's called Consult Line. And they can call and get help with any special ed issues. And they'll have you sign this every time, just saying that you were aware that you can receive this packet, or you said that you didn't need the packet, because you'll get a billion of these by the end of the school year, or by the end of your school life. Next is medical assistance program billing notice. And then with this, it's just signing off that the school, if the child has MA or medical assistance, the school can go ahead and bill for part of those services. And with part of those services, typically would be paid through insurance. And if they're not, the school would have to cover that complete funding. By the parents signing off on this, the school can go ahead and bill insurance for some of those services. So it just helps get the school a little bit more funding. All right, so getting into the main sections, because a lot of that was just the legality forms that need signed in general. So with this, it's special considerations, and this is going to be all yes or no checks, and it's all based on team decision. So you would just check yes if it applies to the student. If the student is blind or visually impaired, if the student's deaf or hard of hearing, if the student has communication needs. So if this child would specifically need speech and language services, that box would be checked yes. Does the child need an assistive technology device? Does the student have limited English proficiency? So typically, if this child is a English second learner or ESL, that would be checked. And then this is, yes, so every yes has to be addressed in the IEP. And then the big one at the end is, does the student exhibit behaviors that impede his or her learnings of others? So sometimes IEPs can be written out for a student that is solely a behavioral kiddo. So a lot of times when you think of special ed, you think of a specific disability, whether it's a learning disability, autism, you know, a student might have Down syndrome. And actually, guys, I think my chat box just popped up for some reason. But an IEP can be written for behavior. The behavior would have to impede that child's learning or the learning of others. So in that stance, if the child is showing behaviors and it's becoming an issue and the school would like to get it looked at, or the parents are becoming concerned, in order to get this marked yes, a functional assessment of behavior needs to be done. And that typically in a school is called an FBA. And the FBA would look at behavior and it would come up with a positive behavior support plan with the child. If a child has a behavior plan, this needs to be marked yes. And that's a big one because we get into schools that don't always want to check yes when it's a behavioral kiddo. So that's sometimes where we have to push back a little bit on that. All right, so with transition section, schools will not talk about transition until the student's 14, when they become of age of transition. So if the kiddo is only in 2nd grade, this is all going to be blank and they will skip right over it. Now, the year that the child's turning 14 in the IEP year. So even if the child's 13 at that time, but he's going to be turning 14 in 2 months, they will address it. And then with this is where they're going to look at anything that's after school life. So anything that would be into adulthood. So they're going to go ahead and write out goals that work with the transition. So there's going to be a post-secondary education and training goal. So if the child is looking at going to college, this is where it would be marked. If a child is looking at going to VOTEC school, or maybe the child just wants to go right into the work field and, you know, maybe they want to work at a dining hall serving food, and that's what they enjoy doing, and that's what the end goal would be, is just to get employment coming out of school. The other goal would be an employment goal. So let's look at that employment of going back to an example of that person that maybe wants to be at the dining room. We're going to look at a goal that we can go ahead and balance with that. Maybe they need help with you know, really time management. Maybe they're spending too much time working on one specific task at that job site. And this is really where we're going to work on helping them manage their time at work. The other thing that could be here is, you know, maybe we need to work on math goals because this child wants to go to college, but he has a learning disability in math. So we're really going to target our math goals that can make them employable. So, you know, maybe they need to work on money, or maybe they need to work on, if they're a little bit more advanced, maybe they want to really hone in on multiplication. Maybe they struggle with division. These are all things that could be there. And then we're going to relate it back to whatever job goal that child has. So it really varies per child. The other one's going to be independent living goal. So does this child want to live on their own? Knowing some disabilities, maybe this child's going to have a goal of going to a group home so that they can move out from their parents, but they still can be supported. But within that, maybe they need to learn how to dress themselves a little better. Maybe they need to work on hygiene. We've had ones in there of helping organize with healthy eating. I mean, it really varies. We've had kiddos that wanted to work on what road signs so that they could eventually take a bus to get to their job without having to be supported. So they need to read a bus schedule. And again, all those goals would tie in with one another. So if we're learning how to read road signs or bus schedules, this is ultimately going to help them down the road get into a job that they could go by themselves without being super supported by someone, and that independence is really built on there. All right, so then in present levels, this is kind of the big bulk at the beginning of the IEP. And with present levels, you want to include any information from the evaluation report. So there's typically going to be an evaluation report initially, and that's what would go ahead and make the child eligible for special ed or not. And all that information would be put right into the IEP so the teams know the most updated assessments. Now, come the following year, you know, no new updated assessments or reports have been done, but they might pull out, you know, that child's IQ or that child's achievement level, so they can put that in there so they really know what the latest assessments were done, so they can really look at that piece of that child. Also, you want to have a good, clear picture of that student's abilities and achievement. So typically when people think of an IEP, they think about the needs of the child and where their deficits are. But also in reality, the IEP should be showing the strengths of the child, and it should be showing where they excel and how can we add them into their everyday life so that they can really get a full rounded education and really support where their strengths are. All right, and then if a child is 14 or older, they should go ahead and be part of that process within those present levels for any assessments that were within transition skills. You know, what are their interests? What do they see themselves doing after school? You know, and really look, are they able to feed themselves? Are they able to dress themselves? Are they able to keep themselves clean, or do they need support with all that? And then what vocational skills do they have? You know, can they go ahead, and we have kids at, like I mentioned, dining halls. We have kids going to VOTEC. So, you know, if they're looking at electrician or masonry, can they do all that? We've had kiddos in nursing programs. So what skill level are they? And that should all be included, and the child should be able to do part of those assessments and really explain where they want to be once they're out of high school. Now, obviously, some kids that are nonverbal or, you know, have a more severe disability, they might not necessarily be able to answer those questions, but the team can get an overall good sense of what kind of interests them, and where their skill set are, where their skill set is, or what vocational skills do they have. So are they able to carry a tray over to a table? Are they able to make change that they maybe can work a register? Are they good with picking up items and putting them in a bag? Because we have people that do different work programs, bagging goods at Walmart. You know, can they cook? Can they bake? It's any of those kind of things would really be looked at in that section. And then also, this is where you're gonna list the needs. Now, I said you really want to focus on the strengths of that child because that's a big important piece, and you really want to embrace that. But also, you're going to be wanting to look at the deficits and where the support is needed for that child, because otherwise they're not going to access their education to the fullest capacity. So with that, they need to they'll have a list of strengths listed, and then they'll have a list of needs that are listed as well. If a need is listed, it needs to be addressed in the goals or the SDI sections. And we will get to that in a little bit down the road. But if it's in the IEP as a need, it needs to be addressed somewhere. And again, this is present levels. So I've looked at IEPs, and it's the same exact information from the year before, and it's literally the teacher has copy and pasted. That's not good. Like, that's not present levels. And I get the child might have the same behaviors as last year, but you need to update the levels because that child looks very, very differently than he did the year previously. So again, all this should be updated information or the most relevant information. All right, so then this is getting into the testing site. So, and I know this is kind of small, guys. I mean, I'll explain it as best I can, but like I said, I will be sending out a PowerPoint, so don't stress too much on the actual look of it. Just the overall headings are good enough to look at right now. So there's going to be state assessments, and this could be, everyone hears of the PSSAs and the dreaded state testing. So this is going to be that section. And it's also going to be the keystones, now that high schoolers have to take after they've done algebra and certain biologies, and I think English is the other one. So this is going to list where all those accommodations are going to need in place for that. Now, I know with the state testing, the state comes out with pretty strict guidelines of what students can actually be accommodated with. So I know some parents would like more accommodations, but it's a very, very strict guideline that comes down from state levels that they can only do so much. So if a child needs the directions read out loud and passages read out loud, some of those can only be read out loud one extra time. If they need extended time, extended time's pretty much across the board going to be a given. But, you know, maybe math problems are on there and a child cannot be read the math problems if it's a word problem, because they want the child to be able to pick out certain words on their own. So it is very strict guidelines, but that's always just to be mindful if for any reason you want a specific accommodation in there. So then the other one's going to be your district testing, which is your local testing, as it's also called. And that's going to be any of your like benchmarks a lot of times. So they'll just kind of see where a child's at on grade level, and it's going to be considered localized. And typically these are going to be more than most with the elementary kiddos with the benchmarks. And then as you get a little older, it's just going to be a general local assessment. But those benchmarks really let you know if the child is, you know, if they're testing a first grader, is he really truly at a first grade level, or is he at a kindergarten level? And they'll really just look at that. But again, accommodations can be in place there. They have a little bit more leniency with those accommodations than the state testing. So again, these are just the PSSAs, the keystones, and then the alternative to the PSSAs is the PASA. And with the PASA, this is going to be any child that would need an alternative. So it's typically for our more severe disability kiddos. So if they have ID or severe autism, these are typically ones that the children are just not going to be on grade level to do like third grade math or science or reading and truly understand it. And you know, like our nonverbal kiddos would be with PASA because they monitor these a little different. So typically with these really break it down so they're relevant to science and math, but it's a lot more basic questions that are a little bit more comprehensive for that level of child. And then also with this, any accommodation that's given in a state or local assessment has to carry over to any test that's given to a child at school. So if a math test is being given at school and on your PASAs, you have extended time, you have the directions read out loud, those would have to carry over to that math test. And small group reading, or a small group testing, I mean, is one of the other common accommodations for testing, just to give those kiddos a little bit more quiet and not as much distraction. All right, so this is probably one of the bigger sections of the IEP, which is the goals and objectives. So with these goals, you want to make them realistic, and again, they're for 1 year. Can this child achieve this goal in 1 year time span? Because if not, it shouldn't be a goal. If they should be able to achieve it in 5 weeks, again, it should not be a goal. The IEP is going for an annual mark, and that's how long it should take roughly for this child to make this goal. They should make it within that mark. You want to make sure that it's measurable. And what I mean by that is, can someone actually track this goal? Can, you know, just for instance, if a child needs to read 80 words per minute, that's a lot of words, but if a child can read 80 words per minute, that can be measurable, because did the child only read 50 words? Did the child read 90 words? We can measure that. If it's something a little bit more subjective, so, you know, a child made an appropriate response to a peer's joke, how are we measuring that? We need to break that down and really, okay, did he say good job? Did he hit the child? Those are all things that are measurable. You don't want something that's subjective, so it's a little bit more concrete. Again, following that, is it measurable? We really want to make it clearly defined. So if this child says needs help with his writing, the goal could be this child would write out 5 concise sentences with a starter sentence given. So that's pretty clear. The teacher is going to give him a starter sentence, and the student needs to come up with 5 sentences following that. And then they might follow up that goal with, based off the rubric of the PSSAs. So the PSSAs will grade a child on a certain rubric. So did they have punctuation? Did they have an action word in there? Did they, however they grade it in a, usually it's like a 1 to 4 rubric. So that's, again, that's measurable. So it's clearly defined that we're giving him standards that would correlate to the testing that he's doing. We're realistically looking for 5 complete sentences for that child. It's measurable because we have the rubric and we know exactly what he's scoring. He needs to score 15 out of 20 points on that rubric in order to master the goal. Again, it could be anything with behavior. So, you know, this child might have an issue with completing work. The goal could state something along the lines of, this child will complete 80% of his assignments daily with 80% accuracy. So at that point, is the child completing 80% of his assignments in that class? And what is his grades on those papers? Is he getting at least 80%? And then they're going to monitor these goals. And with these monitoring, they need to make sure that they're meeting their needs. So the monitoring is going to make sure that the goal is realistic. Are they able to meet it? And then also, maybe that goal is not being met because it's not meeting their needs. So going back to that completion example that I gave you, maybe it's really not the completion that's an issue. Maybe it's him not asking for help. He's completing, but he needs an initiative response from someone in order for him to require help. Or, you know, this is wide ranging across different students. So I am throwing out some generic examples. And like I said, if you have any more specific questions in relevance to a specific case, we can definitely talk after this and go a little bit more in detail. But the overall general consensus, you want to make sure the goal is relevant to the needs that are listed, and you got to make sure that it's clearly stated on what we're measuring, and we need to make sure that it's not subjective. So across the board, if the math teacher and the English teacher are both collecting data on this goal, we need to make sure that they're consistent with what's expected of this and not their own opinion. Within this, anytime that a report card is given out for regular ed is when a report of progress is going to come out for kiddos with IEPs. And this is going to be called progress monitoring. And with this process, it's just going to relay the information on the goals. So going back to instance, say if a child needs to make 80 words per minute reading, but he's only hit 60, 70, 75, 72. They'll let you know all those data points, so you know how close he is to that 80, or if he's not even achieving close, that he could be at 30, 40, 45, you know, and then we might need to relook at the goal at that point, because it's not realistic for him to achieve that in 1 year. So at the bottom of each goal, it's going to be short-term objectives, or you'll hear it as an STO. And with that short-term objectives, if any child is taking that alternatives assessment, so that PASA, which again is that alternative to that PSSA state testing, a child must have a short-term objective. And with that short-term objective, so say if a kid is working on math and they need to be able to do addition with 3-digit numbers. The short-term objective would be, the first one would be with single-digit numbers, and then the second one would be with 2-digit numbers. Now, you could even break it down even more. If it's 3-digit numbers, maybe the first one's going to be 2-digit numbers, and then the second one would be 2 digits with borrowing or with regrouping numbers. So it breaks it down, just whatever that end goal is, you want to have the steps that get you to that point without jumping right to the goal. And again, all these goals will be completely different for every kid. It just depends on what their need is. So some kids will have, you know, math, some kids will have writing, English. These will be where your speech goals are. So if a child maybe can't articulate the letter R, this is where that's going to be. Or maybe you have the pragmatic speech, and that would be kids maybe can't, if they're asked a question, they can't express what they want. So that would be working on that pragmatic, receptive, and expressive language. It could be behavioral. It could be social emotional. So maybe they don't know how to interact appropriate with a peer. This could also be where OT would have a goal maybe for handwriting, to make sure that the child's staying on a line within so many inches, or make sure that they can write out their name, anything like that. And then you could have PT in there, and maybe this child needs to learn how to walk up and down steps with alternating feet. So that could be a goal in there. And again, all these would have short-term objectives if that child is appropriate for that alternative assessment. Okay, so then this is probably the next big section. Your goals and SDIs are going to be your 2 big sections. So with this, you have your SDIs, and that's specialized designed instruction. And with that, it's going to be modifications and accommodations for a child. So some accommodations could be that extended time to complete task. It could be preferential seating. So maybe the child has ADHD and gets very distracted by peers, so the child needs to be sat up front by the teacher. We've seen break cards. So the child has a break card, and if they put that on their desk, they can go outside in the hall for 3 minutes and take a breather. I mean, this is a wide range of stuff. It could be, you know, a kid needs modified scissors to cut, ones that are spring-loaded. It could be, you know, they need to have a token economy. So if you do so much of your work, you get a sticker. After 5 stickers, you get a prize. I mean, this section really, really varies, and it needs to really address what the needs of the child is, and that's what the accommodations are. And modifications are a little different than accommodations. Modifications are where you're really, truly modifying that kid's program. So say, for instance, an accommodation could be chunking. And chunking would be, instead of having 10 problems on a page, you only have 5 problems. So it doesn't look as daunting to a child. They can take a little bit more of a breather, but visually they only see 5. But regardless, if they flip over the page, another 5 problems are there. So they're still getting 10 problems. It's just visually different. With modifications to a program, that would be maybe the child only has to do the even numbers and they get credit for it. So out of those 10, they're only doing 5. Again, that was just an example. Modifications can look different across the board, and same with SDIs. But again, these are all going to be the accommodations parts. So in this, you're going to mark your location. So are they having it at school? Are they doing it in the learning support classroom? Are they doing it in, you know, the regular ed classroom? That's going to be the location. And then with frequency, how often are they getting it? So if they can have a break card, that's going to be daily. So at any time they have that option. If they, some people, some schools will write as needed, and that's a no-no. So with as needed, and the same with opportunities, it's a little subjective. So if the teacher feels that that child needs it, then they can give it to them. But maybe that teacher that day doesn't feel like the teacher, that child needs that break right then. So the state does not like those words because they want something a little bit more concrete on when can this child take this accommodation, when, what does this look like? So, you know, going back to the example of the break card, we can say daily. That child can use that break card at any point in time that he might need it. If it's as needed, it's not all the time. So that's just something to look for when moving into looking at the SDI sections, to make sure that it's really spelled out in that child's IEP of when they can use these accommodations and when they're not appropriate. So, you know, one could be a child needs a calculator for any math problems. And again, that would be daily. And then there's ones that they might put in social skills group. So a lot of schools do lunch bunch around here. Maybe not so much this year with COVID, but with lunch bunch, what it is a peer, a child can pick a peer and go to the lunchroom a little bit early, and they can do games, and they try to incorporate some kind of social skill. So for the frequency of that, maybe it's only once a cycle. Again, they might add different things in there. So if he's adaptive PE instead of his regular ed PE, maybe he's getting that twice a cycle. So anything that's going to be that frequency is going to be added in there. And again, it's going to be the dates, and the anticipated duration is going to be that year-long goal again for the IEP. So at the bottom, or at the middle section, is related services, and these are going to be pretty much all your therapies and or anything that needs to address with that child, such as transportation or maybe nursing or counseling. So like transportation, for instance, is the service. Location would be curb to curb pickup is typically what you'll see, and then the frequency is daily because that child's going to need the van instead of a bus every time that school's in session. Again, speech, maybe he has 30 sessions out of the year. Same with PT, maybe he has 15 sessions out of the school year. With OT, maybe he has 54 sessions out of the year. So again, you just want to break down those frequencies of how many sessions they'll have a year. And typically schools will not write that they have speech once a cycle. They'll write how many sessions they have overall as a whole in a year, because what happens with those related services is that they're listed once a cycle, and that child might be absent or that teacher had to take off for a certain day, then they're obligated to make sure they get that session in that week. And sometimes it's just not feasible. So they'll make up the session, but how they word it is they'll maybe stick to that 30 sessions a year, and within that year they'll make up the session somewhere. So that's pretty typical to see that it's going to be off a yearly session more so than a cycle at that point. And then supports for school staff, or you'll hear SSP is another acronym. And with the supports, the school is going to be essentially those related services. So maybe the speech teacher is doing a direct one-on-one session with the child, and also a push-in session with a group maybe. But maybe that speech teacher also needs to consult with, excuse me guys, consult with the staff to make sure that they're using the appropriate accommodations with that child. For example, with OT, maybe that child started biting on stuff, and the child's really fidgety, he has ADHD, and they've noticed that the behaviors of distractibility is really increased. So maybe the OT is going to talk on the side with the teacher and come up with some ideas, and maybe supply that kid with fidgets that really work for him. You know, there's the rubber bands on the bottom of the chairs, or fidget spinners, anything like that. But that's where those supports would be, and the staff is talking with those therapists to come up with a better game plan. Okay, and then this one is for gifted support. So if a child has a disability and is found to be gifted, they're considered twice exceptional. Personally, I haven't had too much experience with gifted kiddos. We've had a handful, but they need to be supplied. So what we see a lot of times is a kid maybe with a learning disability in reading or writing, and a lot of time people, so this is, a lot of people will think of dyslexia as that learning disability. Schools will not call it dyslexia. They will call it a learning disability in writing and reading. But we've seen kids with that learning disability, but also are very gifted, and their comprehension and grade level are exceeding anything where they should be. So you need to make sure you're supporting both those needs. So if a child needs support with making sure his reading and writing is correct, but he's at, you know, he's in 5th grade, but he's reading at an 8th grade level, you need to make sure you're giving him 8th grade level with the supports in place to make sure that he's writing and reading correctly. Again, all these services are very different for each child, but just because a kid has a disability doesn't mean you forget the gifted portion. You really want to make sure that they're working to their full capacity. So ESY is extended school year. And this is always going to be a conversation. ESY is really not determined until the winter sometime, usually in February. But with this is you're going to either be eligible or ineligible, and more than most kids are ineligible for ESY. And what they look at to determine it is regression and recruitment. So it has to be based off when an extended break has happened. So typically the 2 factors that they're going to look at is summer break and then Christmas break, because that's going to be the longest breaks in the year from having education for those kids. So over the summer, say the child is working on identifying letters, and out of capital letters, they can identify, say 24 of those letters. But when they come back at the beginning of the school year, they're at 20 letters. And so they regressed by 4 letters. So at this point, then they're going to look at how long does it take that child to regain or recruit those 4 additional letters. So if it only takes a couple weeks, okay, then that's not too bad. I mean, typically, even with regular ed kiddos, you're going to have some regression, and it's just a matter of getting them back into the pace and picking up those lost pieces. But if that child is at 20 words coming back at the beginning of the school year, and we're talking about we're at the end of November and they're only at 22, yeah, we're probably going to be looking at what happens over that Christmas break, because they're not regrouping in a decent amount of time. So again, they typically wait until February because they like to look at the data from Christmas as well as the summer. So even over this, you think winter break isn't as long as summer, but kids will regress slightly over that. And again, they're really looking at how much regression and then how long does it take them to regain. If it's an abundant amount of time to regain or recruit those missing pieces, then you're probably going to be found eligible for ESY. And then at ESY, what they do is they'll take your goals and any information that the kid is already well aware of and has mastered, they'll apply them there. So it's pretty much a maintenance. It's not really teaching them anything new. It's just making sure they don't lose what they already have. So that's really what ESY is. And ESY is going to typically look at 4 to 5 weeks in the summer, and they're typically half days. All right, so with educational placement, and this is, again, different across the board with every child. So the one thing I like to say before we get really in depth on placement is I always tell parents that I'm working with is try not to get focused on the label. You want to really focus on what the need of that child is. Need is what's going to drive programming, not the label. So I always like to use this as an example. So briefly before I get into the example, there is a difference between medical diagnosis and an educational diagnosis. So a doctor will give you a medical diagnosis, and then you can take that to the school and say, I want my child evaluated for special ed services to see if he's eligible for support. So if the outside diagnosis comes as autism, that child might not meet the need for an educational diagnosis of autism. But what happens is, so this child has a medical autism diagnosis, but really the need breaks down to this child has poor receptive and expressive language. So they can't get their needs or wants met, and it causes behaviors because they're not able to express what they want. In the school setting, it might not be autism, but they might offer that child speech and language services so they can really work on that pragmatic language and really build those receptive and expressive language. Just because he doesn't have the educational autism diagnosis does not mean he doesn't have autism. It's just not where the need's at in a school setting. So again, with that, they're meeting the need of the speech, but it's not the label that the parents necessarily thought it would be going into it. So again, I always throw this out. Try not to focus so much on the label that's in an educational placement. Focus on that list of needs and are they being met? So it could fall in, maybe the child does have autism, but he really needs reading support. And it's not really anything to do with autism, but that's his diagnosis. So maybe they're going to give him learning support so that he can be supported for reading. So this is always something to consider. So with this placement, this is always going to be the final part of the IEP. The goals and the needs need addressed first, and then we're going to determine where we really want this child to succeed and how to do that. So it's going to explain what instruction is going to be done in a special ed setting and what instruction is going to be done in a regular classroom. They'll break this down and they might say, you know, a child will be with non-disabled peers. The language gets a little, you got to really read it sometimes, but a child will participate with non-disabled peers for gym, recess, cafeteria, and morning meeting. But then the child will participate with disabled peers for 30 minutes of learning support in reading, 20 minutes of learning support in writing, or it's an abundance of whatever service. The different placements, you know, you have autism support, you have social skills, you have learning support, maybe in reading, writing, math. You have speech, you have occupational therapy, you have physical therapy. All those places that anytime a student would be pulled out of a regular ed classroom, that's considered a special education placement. So all that time is going to be calculated there. And once they start calculating that data, they're going to determine if that child's itinerant, supplemental, or full-time. And pretty much what that breaks down to is, for itinerant, is the child in special ed for 20% or less of his day. So if he's only going out to learning support for 30 minutes out of his entire school day, he's going to be an itinerant student because he only needs minimal support to be successful. Supplemental would be more than 20% of the day, but less than 80. And a lot of times we'll see this with kiddos that, you know, for example, they might be in autism support, but they go out for regular ed specials with their typical peers. You know, they might have recess and lunch with those typical peers. And typically with those couple different classrooms with the regular peers will bring them down enough that they're only supplemental level. And then full-time is 80% or more of their day. So these are kids that are in the special ed classroom essentially all day. They might come out for, you know, lunch and recess, or whatever it would be. Maybe they eat in the classroom for whatever reason, but they can attend art class because that's something that really gets them focused and they are able to do it within their level. So that's pretty much what it's going to break down to, is those 3 levels of supports. And then the type of special supports, again, is, I had listed a couple: the autistic support, blind, visually impaired support, deaf and hard of hearing, emotional support, learning support, life skills, multiple disabilities, physical support, or speech and language. So if a kid's in an AS classroom or an autistic support classroom, you would obviously have autistic support, and maybe they have speech services. So speech would be checked also. Not just one section has to be addressed here. We've had kids in learning support and emotional support because they might have some behavioral issues and they really need to focus on social skills, or how to self-regulate themselves and get themselves calmed down. So it really varies on the kid and what their needs are again. Again, this is just going to be based on their time in education. So at the end is going to be the location of the program. Where is this IEP being implemented? So typically, if a kid is at their home building, so if that kid is as if he was a regular ed student with no special ed services, and he's in his school that he should be in, that's going to be his home school. Some buildings, though, don't have the support level that maybe is needed for that child. So some rooms do not have emotional support rooms. So a child might be moved to a different building, but within the same district, in order to access that emotional support. And then there's also some that a child might need to be moved to an alternative ed placement due to behavior. And then that's not even their home district that's servicing that, but that would need to be listed here where this IEP is being implemented. And this is always decided after the needs are written. So whatever support is needed, that's where the child needs to go. And this is just PENNDATA reporting. So this really isn't something that parents need to fuss over too much. This is just reporting for the state. The schools have to fill this out, and then they'll document all this to the state so that they're aware of how many kids are in district with special ed services and what level of support and how often they're being out in regular ed. The percentages are just going to break down into whether they're itinerant, supplemental, or full-time. And then I just want to go over some advocacy tips for everyone on how to have a little bit more effective IEP meeting. So within this picture here, I know that chat box is off right now where I can't see it, but if you take a picture or look at this picture, can you guys kind of see who would be the family? And this is typically not what we want to see at an IEP meeting. This is Sally's family. They did not bring anything to her IEP meeting. They are confused and unable to participate. Sally's IEP has little input from Sally's family. Don't be Sally's family. The ones with nothing in front of them. One of my biggest things that I always tell parents is have a paper, take notes, review the documents, know what you're reading, come prepared. Sometimes when you come to a school meeting and you're not quite sure what to ask, you're not quite sure what the documents say, and we're not expecting parents to know the document word for word and understand everything in there. I mean, there is a point to asking questions and learning from that document, but we've had a lot of parents that maybe come in and they don't have any idea of what's coming. And I'm like, well, do you want me to take notes for you? Because if anyone's had a meeting with me, I'm always taking notes. So we offer the take notes with them, and we're always hoping that, you know, we can pass that skill on, because note taking, whatever that looks like, even if you have to bring your laptop or have someone take them down for you, that's an important skill to have, so you're aware of what's actually being said at the meeting when you go home to process it. So some things to bring to the IEP. I always have a pen and paper, and I'm always taking notes. So that's always a good way that you can jot down stuff and try to remember it, because, you know, I've been at 3-hour-long IEP meetings, and come the next day, I can't remember what was said right at the beginning of the meeting. So I'll check my notes to jog my memory. Bring the current IEP. Make sure you know mostly what's in it and what goals they're working on, what SDIs do they have. Bring progress reports. So that would be that progress monitoring of how this child's doing with the goals. Are they close to mastering them? Are they regressing on the goals? Are they even close? Are the goals appropriate? That's where that information would be. And then bring the most recent evaluation. If an evaluation was done last year and the information's relevant to maybe something that's going on this year, for, you know, maybe his speech services, maybe he was, you know, at a different rate last year during that evaluation, and he was further along, and now he's regressed, that information can be pulled from that evaluation to be reviewed. Bring in an agenda if that works for you. Some people really need to have it written down of what they want to discuss. I know some parents have called and they have so many concerns, and, you know, they can't remember all the concerns come the meeting. And there's been a bunch of times where I walk out of the meeting, and in the parking lot, the parent looks at me and they're like, oh, I didn't bring this up. Like, I should have brought that up. And it's like, you know, next time, write a list of everything. All your concerns, so that everything makes sure that it's getting addressed in the meeting, and it's not just coming out, because sometimes, you know, IEP meetings will switch over to different topics on the drop of a dime, and you can't always remember if you had touched base on something or not. And there's a bunch of different ways to take notes. So these were just some examples that we put in. All right, what to bring? Bring a friend. Sometimes just that added support for the parents is great. Bring an advocate. This is our advocate director, Holly Turner. So she was actually the intake special ed advocate before she moved up to director of advocacy. You know, bring your mother. Maybe grandma. I've had a lot of teams that do bring grandma, because grandma tutors them in the evening, or, you know, has more of a academic stance with them in some way, because they're trying to help and they have that support there. I've had teams bring food. Honestly, I've seen a quick attitude change when the mom brought in a batch of cupcakes. It was first thing in the morning, and she's like, I know it was a very long meeting. It was about a 2.5-hour long meeting. And she said, I know how my meetings get. I know that I ask for things that I can't always have. And she said, I bring cupcakes in for everyone. And everyone was just a lot more relaxed. And it was just a nice gesture. I mean, I don't see this often, especially now with COVID, everything being Zoom. Obviously, food's not going to be an offering, but you know, we have seen that as an offering for IEP meetings. Always keep it open, have an open mind on everything. Ask where the school is coming from on it and see if you can see why they're thinking this way. You know, maybe they have a certain program in place and parents are like, no, 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 no. But, you know, really keeping an open mind, is this going to be the best for my child, or is it going to be more exhausting to have to deal with? It's one of those things, and it's really kind of making sure that you're open to new ideas. Make sure you're listening. Sometimes, you know, schools, they have it in their mind that they want it a certain way, or the same with parents. They're adamant they're getting this for their child and they want it. But just make sure you're listening to all team members and trying to get all those parts of the puzzle. Eye rolling is never recommended. I know sometimes IEP meetings can get heated. You know, I always try to go into it in an even keel and really try to make sure everyone, you know, finds the best solution for this child. And sometimes when tempers rise, it just regresses the progress, and we don't get anywhere. So I've actually been in meetings where it's become really heated, and it's actually at the point where, okay, let's stop the meeting today and we'll come back next week and finish it, because at that point no one's listening and no one's keeping an open mind. Know the players of the team. So your LEA, your local education agency, this is typically, again, going to be the special ed director or supervisor. It could be the principal. Special ed teachers, they are going to, more than likely, the special ed teacher will be the case manager. So if your child has autism support, that autism teacher is going to be the case manager. Same with such as learning support or emotional support. Any of those supports that would be in need, and it's the special ed teacher that's working directly with that child, is going to be the case manager. Your regular teacher that the child might have specials with, your occupational therapist, your speech therapist, your PT, the psychologist that's maybe doing assessments for a reevaluation, guidance counselor if they're involved, your special education administrator. So again, that could be your special ed director. With all these players, one other tip is sometimes, you know, the parent might only know one or two people at the meetings. I will stop every single meeting at the beginning and make the team introduce themselves, because let alone do I probably not know someone there at the table, but the parents might not know. And honestly, if someone's giving input at that meeting, they should know who that person is. So don't be afraid to just say, hi, I don't know any, like, I don't know half the people here. We need to introduce ourselves. Read the IEP. Really read it. There's a lot of parents that will get an IEP and they absolutely have no idea what services the child is receiving. They have no idea what the goals are. They have no idea when their annual date is. Now, I get everyone gets caught up in stuff, and you might not know stuff like at the drop of a dime on, you know, his annual date or anything like that. But there should be some kind of idea of what services are being provided to that child. Read the IEP. I read it quite thoroughly before any meeting. I recommend parents do too. Within the IEP, when I'm reading it, I flag it with Post-its. I use highlighter, you know, anything that sticks out to make sure you If you have questions, highlight it. If it makes a point towards some concern that you have, highlight it. Put post-it notes so you know what page to flip to. If anyone's at a meeting with me and you see my IEPs, I always use a bright pink or bright green highlighter and make sure that it's well aware of the areas of concern that I see. Take notes. If you have trouble multitasking, ask someone else to take notes for you. I've had a bunch of parents ask me to, once I type up my notes, to send it to them because they can't process the meeting and write notes. So it's always an option to even ask school team members. Be positive. You get a lot more flies with sugar. So going in not in a positive manner usually sets the tone right away. And I understand certain situations will arise and cause certain attitudes towards certain people or situations. But if you try to go into every meeting with some positivity, it usually gets you a little further with the schools. Don't finger point. Again, like I said, I know things get heated and things will happen. That's just a part of life, but it's just something to be mindful of. Dress the part. Don't maybe roll in with sweatpants and slippers on. Make sure you seem prepared. Again, that kind of shows that you're ready for this meeting. Don't criticize the person. Make sure if there was an issue coming out, I always suggest really talking about that issue and finding a way to move forward from that issue. Sometimes when you really get focused on a specific issue and you just start to butt heads, and it's hard to move forward when you just keep pointing fingers and the other person's pointing fingers back. So it's just, really trying to find that middle ground. Ask questions. That's one of my biggest tactics, is just ask questions. Really, what does that support look like with my child? How does this goal get measured? What is his baselines for this? It's ask any questions, and typically if you just start asking about certain things that you might not understand program-wise, you'll understand why they maybe want to try this program versus another program. And always try to end the meeting on a positive note. And again, I know some meetings can get very heated, but if you try to, say thank you for everyone that's attending and making sure that they're checking in and just kind of letting them know that you really are appreciative of the support that they are giving your child, it goes a long way with school members. If you disagree with something at the IEP meeting, you can always have another meeting. You can have as many meetings as you want in a year. And sometimes you might agree with only part of the IEP. Again, you can have a meeting just to discuss the parts you disagree with. There's times where you're not sure about an idea, so let's give it a month trial and we'll do a check-in in a month to see if it's working or not. Again, it's kind of ending it on that positive note of working as a team and being collaborative on ideas. So be clear on the next time. So if you want to do a trial, make sure, hey, we're all here right now. Let's set a date for the next meeting. That's usually a good tactic because everyone's already in the room. And then here are some resources that are listed, that consult line that you guys can always call and ask questions with anything related to special ed. There's a couple other numbers on here. And like I said, we'll be passing or sending out a PowerPoint. So you'll have all these resources on that. All right, so I'm going to unshare real quick so I can see my chat box and kind of go back and answer any questions that might have been here. If you give me 1 second to look. All right, is it bad if there is no revisions listed on the demographic page, but there has been many? I think it depends on the actual revision. So if it's a revision for a goal, that needs to be marked on there. But if it's a revision maybe for, you know, we're adding that he needs a fidget to better help with his distractibility. So something just to sit there and fidget with during class. That doesn't necessarily have to be listed because it's just something that can be added in real quick. But anything with the revisions would be more oriented towards those goals. So say if a child has mastered their goals and it's only halfway through the IEP year, we need a new goal. So we're going to revise what the goal is. All right. How long would it take for a child to receive an FBA? What if one or the other, either the parents or the school, do not think an FBA is necessary? So I guess that really depends on the behavior. So then behaviors have to impede the child and or others to see if it's necessary. If the child really is not impeding behaviors, and I do not want academics to be considered part of that. I have a lot of kids that are very, very intelligent, but they have behavioral issues. So that doesn't necessarily justify that child not needing to be looked at for a behavior plan. But there has to be data that supports that they need an FBA. So whatever that behavior is, you know, is he eloping from the room? Is he punching peers? You know, those are all things that we might really want to look into getting an FBA done. But if it's something more like, you know, my child is withdrawing and they're not really expressing how they feel, if they're confused over a problem, they're not asking for help, that might not necessarily be an FBA. That might just be maybe we need to work on self-regulation, or maybe we need to work on self-advocacy skills within that child's IEP. Typically an FBA needs a couple weeks to be completed, so they need to track it across different environments and all those behaviors to see how many times whatever that targeted behavior. So typically they will come up with 2 or 3 behaviors to track. So say if it's an aggressive kid, look, how many times are they hitting a peer? How many times are they eloping the room? How many times are they screaming out at a peer? Those would be all things that they are look at over like a 2-3 week time span to see how often they're occurring. And then what the point of the FBA is they're looking at the behavior, but they're looking at what the antecedent of the behavior. So what is the trigger? What's causing these behaviors? And then they're also going to be looking at what happens after the behavior occurs. Like why are they doing this? Have they gained what they want? So maybe it's to gain access to for attention from its staff. So if they hit a peer and then the teacher comes over to them and they're perfectly fine, maybe that's what they wanted. They wanted attention from the teacher. Maybe if they're eloping from the room, they don't want to do the work. So they're eloping to get away from the work, and that would be task avoidance. So it's hard to say without knowing what the exact behavior is, but it really varies if it classifies enough to track the behavior and how often it's occurring. Because the other thing is, if it's a behavior that only happens once every 5 weeks, there's no way to really track that in a 2-week time span because it's so sporadic. So they might put other things in place, maybe like a token economy, or, you know, a break area, or some social skills, whatever that would look like, but maybe not necessarily have a behavior plan written out for that. And the other thing is, I didn't put it in the PowerPoint, but with an FBA, a positive behavior support plan would be in the IEP if needed, and it would break it down to what that child's, how to avoid the behavior. So maybe they need scheduled breaks, maybe they need extended time, maybe they need someone checking in on him. And then there would be the replacement behavior, and that would be, what do we want the child to do instead of hitting a peer? So maybe we want to have him express, I need help, instead of hitting the guy next to him. And then there's a portion that would be consequences, and that's positive and negative consequences. So if he does the replacement behavior and he requests for help, how are we rewarding him? Like, are we giving him a prize? Is he getting some downtime? Is he just getting a verbal praise, a high five? And then there's the negative consequence. So whatever that might look like, maybe he loses a token, maybe he needs to go in the calm down corner. You know, that varies per kid, but I didn't put that in there because not every kid has a positive behavior support plan. Okay. If my child needs a service that the school does not provide or school district, do they legally have to supply whatever is needed? If they determine that a child needs a specific service and they do not have it within district, they need to look at an alternative placement. Maybe they need to look at getting that service. It really depends on what that equates to. So say for instance, if a child needs autism support and he needs a classroom and not just like a check-in, but his home building does not have autism support, they only have emotional support. They might move him to a different building that has autism support. Depending on what the service is, you know, if we have a behavioral kiddo and emotional support is just not doing enough for him and he really needs more of a therapeutic setting, that could be something to look into for an alternative ed placement. And that could be, you know, typically those are local, but they're not considered district buildings. So it really just depends on what the service is. But yes, if the school cannot supply that service that is listed as a need, they need to find a place that they can send them that would supply that service. So it really varies on how that need is listed as well. So life skill, okay, so it's saying, what does life skills support and multiple disability support mean? So life skills is going to be kids that are on an alternative program, essentially. So it's going to be kids that are focused more on functionality in life, of life after high school. So, you know, that's really working on, can they dress? Can they navigate the bus? Can they navigate their house safely? Can they, you know, they're really working on those vocational skills to get them a job coming out of school. It's not that academics are out the window. They are still doing academics, but it's more of a functional academic. So maybe they need to learn how to go into a store and pay for their food and get change back. Maybe they need to learn how to do laundry. You know, it's all those key functional life skills. It would be that placement. And then multiple disability support. Typically, these are going to be our really, really low kids that have multiple disabilities, such as cerebral palsy and intellectually disabled. It could be kids that have, you know, IDD or intellectually disabled and, you know, different like muscular dystrophy or something that would really hinder them being out in a regular ed setting or even life skills at that point. Typically these kids need a lot of therapeutic support. So like they need physical therapy, they need occupational therapy, they need more of hands-on support, and typically the ratios are really small in that, so they have a lot more staffing because they are just a lot more higher needs in that manner. What if they go to middle school, high school where there is no AS? I'm not sure if you mean a classroom or just support in general. So with certain schools, they might only have the support and they might not necessarily have a classroom. So they would have a therapist or a autism support person come in and pull them out, and they usually make do with a room somewhere in the building and utilize social skills or self-regulation. So it just varies. A lot of schools will use around here, they'll use Vista support, they'll use Marikey. Those are like the two big ones. But then it just varies. Like if the child really truly needs an autism support classroom and they're not provided in district, then they would move them to a different district. So around here we have what's called a consortium, and it's 6 different local districts. And so for instance, if Carlisle did not have an MDS classroom, or that multiple disabilities classroom, but Big Spring did, they would move that child to Big Spring. It's just not feasible, and for funding wise, to always have a support classroom for whatever disability in every building for every grade. So, you know, sometimes there's only a couple kids within that consortium that need that service. So the schools kind of got together and they placed the classrooms sporadically throughout these districts. Sorry guys, I was reading. So what if they go into middle school, high school where there is no autism? If a child is in autism classroom for elementary school and then goes into middle school and the school doesn't have that, instead of placement change, they could bring someone in for personal services. So like I said, most schools will use autism support through say such as Vista, and they have that embedded in the school to help those kids throughout with support. And if it's truly a kid that needs that autism room, they'll look into that consortium again and then see if the placement's correct. But they do have autism support typically in schools, but it might just not be a autism support classroom. So it looks a little different across the board. And with that, I mean, those options of looking at an AS room, if those intermediate services don't work, that's always an option to discuss with the team. All right, if a child needed in-school counseling or therapy groups for an emotional disturbance, for example, what would they be something the IEP team would have to agree on, or is that a different process? So any decision that's being made for a child based off supports and needs is always a team decision. Not only one person is going to make that decision. So if they need in-school counseling or a therapy group, that again, the team would need to decide if that need is appropriate, and then if that support would supply that need. Again, it would just typically at that team meeting or the IEP meeting, you know, whether that's an annual one or one that these childs have just started to get these behaviors and now we feel this service is relevant now. Again, that has to be a team decision because anything needs signed off on. So if a support is added into a child's IEP, regardless if it's at the annual or if it's during the year, a NOREP or a Notice of Recommendational Education Placement will be issued to the parent, and the parent has to sign off on that in order for those services to start. So yes, that would be a team decision if counseling's needed. Okay, so does CPARC only deal with public school districts, or do you also have families with cyber schooling, example CCA? We deal with some cyber schools. It just really depends, but yes, we do get involved with CCA. I've had a couple meetings this year, especially with COVID going on. We have a lot more virtual kids this year. We typically do not get involved with private schools. We can if the private schools contract with IU or other services that can be added in. Private schools, though, do not have to follow IEPs because they are not federally funded. And since they are not federally funded, they do not have to support special ed. And this is why you see a lot of a lot of private schools don't necessarily support kids with disabilities. So typically they will just find them ineligible and not enroll them. But with cyber schools, it's not considered private more than most. So like CCA is a public school. So we do support kids in cyber schooling as such. I think that is all the questions. If anyone has any other questions, like I said, feel free to reach out if you just kind of want to touch base on anything, or if you have any just questions about the presentation I gave. I know with it being Zoom and stuff, it's not as interactive as if it was in person, but I'm here in the office, so feel free to reach out. And you have Lisette's contact information. If for any reason you need my email address, you guys can reach out and we can have that. And I'm also listed on our website. And like I said, if anyone has questions, please just feel free to reach out. And I'm going to turn back on Lisette. Lisette, you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, I'm going to.
Hi, everyone. I hope you guys found that informative and illuminating. I sure did, as a mom with a little one with an IEP in school currently. So yeah, thank you for sharing your expertise, Laken. And you're very, very knowledgeable, and all your experience. That was really great and very educational. If anyone has any questions, as always, just, reach out to me, ljohnson@cpark.org. Always keep an eye out for our Facebook, our website. We're constantly, we're going to be pushing out sessions, any updates. If you have any questions regarding this or future sessions or any activities or things that we're pushing out, feel free to reach out. And to announce our winner, Tammy Blackburn. If you could please email me your mailing information so that we're able to get you your gift card. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
All right, guys, I'm going to stop the recording now.